Hello everyone, I am Sara Smith with FableVision Learning and I'm very excited to be here with you today. I have been with FableVision Learning for a few years now. Before that, I was a teacher. I taught at the elementary level for several years in an international baccalaureate school. And while I was teaching, I was always really interested in creativity. But I didn't really know exactly what it meant or exactly what it looked like to foster it in my classroom. But I was really curious about it. And so eventually I went back to school and I got my master's degree in creativity from the International Center for Studies in Creativity at SUNY College at Buffalo. And shortly thereafter, I joined FableVision Learning, where our goal is to bring creativity and compassion to schools all over the world and the teachers and the students in those schools. And so today I am going to talk to you a little bit about creativity and where it intersects with learning, which is what my passion is, how creativity and learning come together. And that's a really important thing to think about as educators. And so one of the ways that those two intersect is what we're going to talk about today. So to do that, I want to start by having you think about what is your favorite story to tell? Just if you meet somebody and you're getting to know each other, what's a story that you enjoy telling other people about yourself and your life? For me, one of the stories that I like to tell is when I was traveling abroad with my sisters and we had made it to Belgium. And we didn't speak the language. We were just in this little town that I don't even remember the name of now. But it was adorable. There were cobblestone streets and there were shops, and we were just kind of wandering around, wondering what we should do. And we saw on the side of a stone building a door that was slightly ajar, and above it there was a sign that said a bunch of stuff that we didn't know, but it had a word like turismo. So we thought, okay, maybe this is where we can get some tourist information. So we open the door and there's just a tiny little area with a table and nobody's at the table. And so we realized though that to our left there's an opening with some stairs. So we think, let's go check it out. So we start walking up the stairs and they seem like they're kind of never ending. They just keep winding up and up and up. And so at some point we realized that we are climbing the bell tower of the church in the middle of the city. And so for those of you that have been to Europe, a lot of these little towns, they're all around a big church. And so we climb up, and when we get to the top, right then the bells start ringing and they are vibrating through us. We can feel the bells, and it's like we're surrounded by the sound of these bells. And we open the door at the top, it's unlocked, and we walk out into a sea of huge bells. Like, I mean, they're like as big as we are. And they're ringing, they're playing this beautiful song, and we can walk around amongst the bells and just kind of feel like we are completely surrounded by the beauty of the music. And so we make our way through this bell tower, and eventually we find the person that's playing the music. And it's a woman. She's sitting at what kind of looks like a piano, but it has levers instead of keys. And we just watch her play until she finishes, and then we greet her. She's very kind. She doesn't say anything rude about us barging in on her playing. But she also doesn't speak English, and we don't speak Flemish. My sister had a little bit of German, so they tried to have a bit of a conversation, but mostly we were just trying to find a way to let her know that it was so beautiful, that we were so happy to hear her music that she was playing. And she was very kind, and then eventually we decided that it was time for us to leave. So we were walking down the steps, and I say, I wish that I had my camera with me. This was back before there were cell phones. But I had left my camera back at where we were staying. So we said, okay, well, let's go back and get the camera, and we'll come back and take pictures so that we can remember this. And so we walked down the steps and past that little table and out the door, and my sister closes the door behind her, and we hear a click. And we both look at each other, and she tries the door, and it's locked. And we realize that we are never going to be able to go back up there, that was a one-time experience for us. But I never forgot it. I didn't need the pictures. We had quite a trip, that trip, but that is the event that I remember viscerally, that I can remember what it feels like to be there, that I love to tell other people. And there's a reason that I remember that story so clearly and that I enjoy telling it. And I bet it's the same reason that a lot of you have a story that you like to tell, and it's the element of surprise. So think about the story that you like to tell, and is there an element of surprise in it? Often there is, and the reason is because surprise is special. It does special things to our brains, and that's why we're going to talk about surprise today, because it's related to creativity and it's related to learning, and it's a really exciting thing that happens to our brains when we encounter surprise. So I have this book that I discovered that I wanted to share with you. This book is called Surprise, and I recommend it if you're interested in this topic. It's by Tanya Luna and Leanne Renninger, and it's actually a funny story about how I found out about this book. I was doing a school project in my master's work, and I was supposed to find a book related to creativity that had been published in the last 5 years. It's been a little more than 5 years. This was written in 2015 now. But I was in the library, and I was looking in the psychology section, and I wasn't finding anything that was really jumping out at me. And so right before giving up, I turned all the way around, and there was a display there. And right there at eye level was Surprise facing me. And I was immediately drawn to it, and I picked it up, and I was really happy that that was the book that I found. So in this book, the authors talk about surprise, and the other part of the title here is Embrace the Unpredictable and Engineer the Unexpected. And so I want you to think about a moment of surprise that you have experienced. And I want you to think about what you felt and what you think you looked like when you were experiencing that surprise. Maybe you are imagining something like this, or maybe this. These are all the pictures that come up when you search for surprise. It's kind of the quintessential thing that we think of when we think of surprise. But actually, that's not what we look like in the moment of surprise. So surprise is when something unpredictable happens, when something that we are not expecting happens. And when we encounter a surprise, the authors talk about the very first thing that happens is actually like in research where they've provided a surprise to somebody, like a surprise ending to a video, and they videotape their responses. The first thing that happens is what they call the duh face, and it's just completely blank face. And the reason for this is because our brains go through what they call the surprise sequence when we encounter surprise. So the very first thing that happens, the very first part of the sequence is freeze. So when something surprising happens, you completely freeze. Your face goes blank and you have all of your attention absorbed by this surprise. So you are completely engaged in what just happened. Whatever you were looking at before, you will turn to look at it, or if it's right in front of you, all of your attention is focused on this surprise. Then the next stage is called find. And that's when you start to search your mind. What is happening? You need to figure out what just happened. And then the next stage is called shift. And that's where you either fit what just happened into your understanding of the world, or you change your understanding of the world. So if you suddenly see something go up instead of fall down, then you either have to decide that what you thought about gravity isn't true, or that there's something going on, some force other than gravity that is making this object go up. So you either have to change how you see the world, or you have to fit it into your understanding of the world. And then the last part of the surprise sequence is share. And because something unexpected and surprising has just happened, we have a strong desire to share it with other people, to tell them about what just happened. And part of that is because it's an emotional experience when we have something surprising happen. When we're surprised, it's kind of an emotional intensifier. So if something negative is happening and we are angry and there's a surprise involved, we're going to be angrier. Or if it's a great surprise and it's full of joy, we're going to feel happier when there's a surprise involved. So it's an emotional intensifier, and we feel a strong need to talk about it and to share it with other people. So when we encounter a surprise, it completely grabs our attention. It makes us intensely curious that we have to figure out what just happened. It requires us to change our understanding in some way. And then we have a strong desire to share about it. Now, if you are anything like me, you might be thinking, wow, that sounds like a recipe for learning. And it is. If we're grabbing attention, we're curious about it, it makes us change our opinions or our thoughts about what we understand and know, and then we want to talk about it. That's a great way to learn. It's also an emotional experience, so it's going to stick in our memories, just like the stories that you thought of at the beginning that you like to tell, and my story of the bell tower in Belgium. They're emotional, so they stick with us. So, surprise and creativity are highly related. The research definition of creativity is something that is novel and valuable. So anything that is new and has some value or is useful in some way is creativity. So it's not just art. It can be anything that's novel and creative. And in my studies on creativity, one of the things that I learned about was the creative problem-solving process. Now, this is a process that researchers were trying to describe the natural way that people solve problems creatively. What do they tend to do? And it has gone through many iterations, as many things do over the years, but the process, this most simply, is described as 4 stages And they don't always happen in order. It's not a linear process, but the first stage tends to be the clarifying stage. And so that's where you define what is the problem. Because when we have a need to solve a problem creatively, it's often an ill-defined problem. It's one that you can think about in lots of different ways. And there's a common quote that people attribute to Einstein, and I don't know how accurate it is, in the world of the internet. But the quote goes, if I had 1 hour to solve a problem, I would spend the first 55 minutes defining the problem and the last 5 solving it. So that kind of points to the importance of being able to define problems, being able to clarify what it is that we need to think about and what it is we need to solve, and how we can look at it, and thinking about it from many perspectives. Then the next stage is ideating, coming up with lots of ideas. Then you move to developing your ideas into workable solutions, and then you move to implementing these ideas and gaining acceptance from those around you and making it happen. Now, when I was learning this, in my studies in creativity, my goal was to connect the things that I learned about creativity to what I understood about education and learning, and to put those together in a meaningful way. And so when I read about the surprise sequence and I thought about the natural creative problem-solving process, I started to notice that there were things in common. And I wanted to think about that in how we can design learning experiences for students as educators. So what I did is I came up with what I like to call the spiral up cycle of creative learning. So in the spiral up cycle, we start with a spark. And this is a great time to introduce a surprise, because we know that a surprise is going to grab attention, which is the first thing that we need from students if we want them to learn something. We need their attention. It's going to engage their curiosity, which is what we need to keep them engaged in a learning experience. And it's going to require them to change what they understand about the world if we can give them this little surprise. And then, of course, they'll want to share about it. So they'll tell their friends about it. They'll tell their parents about it when they go home. That's what we want if we want kids to learn. So we start with a spark. And so we've got the surprise sequence that happens there in the spark. But then the surprise sequence also, after the initial freeze, goes into that find phase where we're trying to figure things out. So the spiral up cycle also talks about the next stage is to seek, and that's finding out information. So we're kind of stretching out the surprise sequence here, and we're also including this creative problem-solving process. So clarifying, where you ask questions and you think about it from all different angles. So this seek part of the spiral up cycle mirrors the find part of the surprise sequence and clarifying in creative problem solving. So asking lots of questions, and really, as teachers, taking the time to allow students to come up with questions. Too often we're the ones asking the questions and we just want the answers, but it's a really important skill to be able to ask questions, especially when you've run into some sort of unexpected surprise and you need to make sense of it. So taking the time to have the students ask the questions, writing down the questions that they have, and the more you do this, the better students will get at asking questions. And so we want to make time for that. Then the next stage of the spiral up cycle is grow. And this relates to the shift part of the surprise sequence and the ideating and developing part of creative problem solving. So this is where we really delve into the topic, where we start to find the answers to some of our questions, and we start to think about what this means, how it relates to other things that we already know, and we start to grow our skills, practicing if it's some sort of skill that they need to develop, or gaining deeper understanding of the topic. Then the final stage in the spiral up cycle of creative learning is ACT. And so this goes with the share part of the surprise sequence and the implement part of creative problem solving. So this is where students use what they have just learned to do something. So they might talk about it to other people, they might teach someone else about it, they might create something related to what they've just learned. But it's important for them to use their knowledge in some way. And when they do, it helps to solidify their learning and keep them engaged and add to what they know, because in the spiral up cycle, it keeps going. So students can be sparked back into more and more learning, where they develop higher levels of skill all the time. And so the spiral up cycle never ends. It never has to end. And after the ACT part and they do something about their learning, they can be sparked right back into more seeking and growing and acting, so that they can continue to move up in the cycle and in their lives. There are some teachers that are especially good at this, and I want to share with you. I'll share with you some resources. There's a teacher on YouTube, and he's a math teacher, and there's an example of him showing the students, these are his calculus students, and he shows them with a proof how 1 equals 2. And of course, even a kindergartner knows that 1 doesn't equal 2, but somehow through this proof, he's showing that 1 equals 2. And in the video, you can hear the surprise in the students' voices. They are shocked that it looks like 1 equals 2 when you look at this proof. So then they start seeking information. They go into that find phase and they start asking questions and trying to figure out what's going on here. And in the end, they do figure out why there was a mistake in this proof. But because it was introduced with a surprise, they're going to remember that for a lot longer. The secret is that you can't divide by 0, and they don't notice that at first, because of the way that the proof is set up. But they are going to remember better than other groups of students just why you can't divide by 0 and what kinds of wild things happen when you do start dividing by 0. So there's another teacher, Dan Meyer, also a math teacher, that does a great job of taking the kinds of problems that we give to students in math, which usually what we give to them is a problem. We give them all the information that they need to solve it, and then we give them an algorithm for exactly how to solve it. And that doesn't really mimic what happens in real life when we run into a problem. Even many math problems, we might not have all of the information, or we might have way too much information, and we might not know exactly which pieces of information we need in order to solve the problem. So he does a great job of taking questions from a textbook and starting with a little spark, where he introduces the problem but doesn't give all of the information up front, and makes the students start to figure out, well, what is it that I need to know in order to figure this out? And so I'll share some of those with you so that you can see that at work. And I love sharing examples of math teachers engaging with students through creativity, because a lot of people think that math can't be creative, and that's just not true. Math can be creative just like any other subject can be creative. And so it's really fun to kind of put that idea on its head and show examples of math teachers using creativity to help their students to learn. Now, recently, my family and I ran into a little surprise. When we were uptown in our city, we were taking a walk. It was a beautiful day, and we noticed some large discs on the ground ahead of us. So we went over, and it looked kind of like play equipment, but not play equipment that we had really seen before. And when we stepped onto these big discs, they started to tilt and music started playing. And there were 3 of them, and my kids loved it. And we played around on each one, and that little surprise that we ran into really sparked a lot of interesting conversations with my son and my daughter. We talked about pitch and tone and electronics and pumps and all these ideas that they had about how is it possible that music is playing out of these. And so surprise is really hiding everywhere, and it creates these beautiful moments of learning if we're paying enough attention and we know how to harness it. Now, surprise is valuable for learning academic subjects, but it's also valuable for our affective growth. So our emotions and our what they call the soft skills that help us to get through life. Because since surprise is something unexpected and unpredictable, it introduces uncertainty into our lives. And uncertainty can be a difficult thing to deal with. So if I were to ask you whether you like surprise, some of you out there probably would say no, or people that you know might say, I hate surprises. Even if they're good, some people just kind of have something against surprises. And it's because of this uncertainty that surprise introduces. Now, this is related to a creativity skill called tolerating ambiguity. This, in the research, is an important skill that people need to hone in order to be creative. We have to be able to tolerate not knowing. And the reason for that is because when we are solving a problem and we've got some ambiguity about how it should be solved or what exactly is going on, we tend to try to get to a point of certainty really quickly. And when we do that, they call it premature closure. So we're trying to find closure to something and get to a point of certainty so fast that we don't remain open long enough for creativity and creative ideas to come to us, or for us to have experiences that lead to creative ways to solve the problem. So when we can stay open longer and accept that we don't know right now, we don't know what's coming, but it's okay, and we can sit with it a little bit longer, then we have the time and the space to let creativity come. And so being able to navigate surprise and the uncertainty that comes along with it is an important part of growing creatively. And the authors of Surprise talk about a surprise seesaw. So they talk about it as if we're all on a seesaw, and one side is surprise and the other side is certainty. And that in life we actually need a balance of surprise and certainty. If we have too much surprise and we never know what's going on and we're constantly in that searching phase, then that leads to anxiety. Too much surprise is too much. But on the other side, if we have too much certainty and we always know what's going to happen, everything goes exactly according to plan, and we don't have any surprising moments, then we get bored. If everything is always predictable, that's boring. So we really need a balance of surprise and certainty in our lives. And so we need to get skilled in responding to surprise. And that helps us to adapt to a quickly changing future. Our lives aren't going to be devoid of surprise, and things in our world change so quickly nowadays that we have to be ready and able to react to surprise in positive ways. And so one of the ways that we can do that in our classrooms is by providing touchstones of stability. So we have had a quite big negative surprise and uncertainty injected into our lives over the last year, where we don't know what is going to happen, even for the rest of the week sometimes. And it can be very destabilizing to not know, to have all that ambiguity and uncertainty in our lives. So when we think about surprise and how we need a balance, we as teachers can help our students through uncertain times by kind of balancing that seesaw out. And we do that by helping our students build resilience. So one of the ways that we can do that is by finding little things to provide stability, like the relationships that they have with us. So, we tend to, especially younger grades, have one teacher that the students see and interact with most of the time. Then we've got, some other support teachers, but having that strong teacher-student relationship, as opposed to, like if a student was meeting a brand new teacher every single day, that would be destabilizing. So they can count on their relationships with us to provide some of that certainty and stability that's going to help them to be able to respond to surprise and enjoy surprise. So having that strong relationship with students, and also providing them with habits and routines and rhythms that they can count on. So, knowing that every morning we're going to have a morning meeting. I know a lot of teachers do a morning meeting. So, having that routine and that rhythm can help to provide some of that certainty that students do need. We all need, then you can inject little surprises within it, but having that routine to count on is important. And that can include routines for calming strategies when students are feeling stressed or overwhelmed. Having mindfulness breaks and activities that you do with students to kind of give them that this is somewhere I can come back to when I need a little bit of stability, a little bit of certainty. Engaging in optimism and gratitude is another way to build that resilience. So not to say that we should be glad for all the negative events, especially that have been happening recently, but that we can help students and ourselves to shift our focus to good things that are happening. And so one of the ways I like to do that with my own children is at the end of the day, we always talk about 3 good things, and they think of 3 good things that happened today. And then another way to build resilience is by when something surprising and maybe negative does happen, or maybe we just think of it as negative, we can use that as kind of a jumping off point for something new. So, for example, Peter Reynolds has a book called Sky Color, and it's part of what he calls his Create trilogy. And in it, the little girl Marisol wants to help paint a mural, and she says that she'll do the sky. But when she goes to her paints, there's no blue. And so in that moment, she's got a negative surprise that she's dealing with. There's no blue, and she's supposed to paint a sky. But the thing that Marisol does really well is that she keeps open. She does not engage in premature closure. She stays open. She stays mindful to the things around her. And by the end, she uses that negative surprise to turn it into something beautiful and something that she wouldn't have done without that happening. So learning to take moments of uncertainty and even moments of unpredictability that seem negative, and turning it into something new, or changing our perspective, how we think about it. That's another way to build resilience. And books and stories are a great way to introduce these kinds of things to our students. They're a way to connect and to talk about some of these important topics. So the way we think about and use surprise in the classroom can open our students to more creativity, to better learning, and can help them build resilience. And that's what we want to do with our students. Now, as teachers, we often tend to avoid uncertainty ourselves. So we might stick to the same lesson plan that we already know and that we've done many times before. But I'd like to encourage you to step outside of your comfort zone just a little bit and find some ways to inject a little extra surprise to both your everyday life and your classroom and your teaching. And it doesn't have to be huge. You can start small. In my house, I have a prism that I put up in the window. And so every day when the light starts shining in, and it changes a little bit each day, as the sun in the sky changes, and it puts rainbows all over the house. And my kids call it rainbow time. And it's just a little spark of something that catches us by surprise each day, where that we can enjoy. And so even little things like that can start to bring a little bit of creativity into your classroom. It's going to require you to stay open and experiment a little bit and maybe fail a few times, but it's going to make your classroom more creative and more memorable learning moments for your students if you can think about surprise and harness it. I recently was able to use surprise in an interesting way. My family has decided to foster a dog for a few weeks earlier this year. And so this puppy was staying with us, and we were trying to help get him adopted into his forever home. And so he had a couple of home visits where he would go and visit with a family and see how the fit was. And he had a home visit coming up, and I happened to see on Facebook, because they commented on a post about him, that they were going to have a home visit with him. And I saw that the family was from Guam. And I actually recently, September before last, I had the opportunity to go to Guam, and we did a creativity training for a week with the teachers on Guam, and it was amazing. It was beautiful. I loved it, and they are so generous and kind on Guam. They gave us lots of little gifts, and one of the things that I had was a button that has a phrase that they use on Guam. It says "Hafa-day," and that's kind of a greeting. It's kind of the Guam version of aloha. And so I had this little button that said "Hafa-day" on it. And so I knew that this family from Guam would recognize that. So I put the button onto the dog's harness so that when he went for this home visit, they would get a little surprise. And I knew that whatever they were feeling about the home visit, that surprise would intensify it. So he went on this home visit. It worked. The mom saw the button. She immediately asked about it. She was like, "How does he have this button? What is this?" And she said, I'm from Guam, and we were able to connect, and I was able to tell her about my experience on Guam. And long story short, they adopted the dog. So that's a little way that I used Surprise recently. So I hope that you all start thinking about how you can use Surprise in your classrooms, how you can balance your students' experience with surprise and certainty, where you can give them some resilience tools that mean that they can enjoy and engage with surprise and also feel safe and stable. And if you would like to connect more, we have a group online. It's a community of practice where we have teachers from all over the world, including Guam, that come together and talk about creativity and education, share their expertise, share resources. It's called the Creativity Circle, and you can join that community for free at thecreativitycircle.org. In the Creativity Circle, we also have a program for educators to get certified in creativity. So this is a year-long program. There's lots of content where we walk you through how to bring creativity into the classroom. And in the end, when you finish, you become a certified creative educator. And so we invite you to come check that out. And we also have some events coming up, creativity symposiums where we engage in creative problem solving together around the things that are important to us in our classrooms. And so we would love for you to be a part of all of those. We at FableVision Learning have a number of creativity tools that can help you to help your students to express themselves and also help to inject a little surprise. We have an animation program where students can learn to animate, and the things that they share when they learn to animate, and watching their little eyes light up when they realize that they can be an animator is really fun. And we have a fabrication program where students can learn to design and create their own creations. And so we would love to connect the dots with you, as we like to say. Feel free to email me at sarasmith@fablevision.com or visit our website at fablevisionlearning.com. And we appreciate you so much and all the things that you do as teachers We know that this has been a hard year with lots of surprise in it, and so we hope that happy surprises are on the horizon.